Welcome to the Pharmacy Frontiers podcast, a podcast dedicated to the profession of pharmacy. We're excited today for our guests and the topics we're going to discuss as part of our ongoing series in podcasts this month. Please check out our Pharmacy Frontiers homepage with a list of our past guests, and be sure to subscribe and bookmark the Pharmacy Frontiers podcast in your favorite podcast app. As a reminder, the views and opinions shared today are those sole opinions of our hosts and our guests and do not reflect the position of NCPA nor our employers. I'm Daniel Good, your guest host for today. Let me introduce Tim Mitchell, our other guest host for today, and he will introduce our guests here to talk about the NCPA Community Fellowship Program.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm really excited to have the two guests that we have on today. Been part of, I've been connected with this group for a while, and just excited to have you guys here and to be able to talk to our listeners about it. We have Drew Register from NCPA. He is director of the Community Pharmacy Fellowship. Believe just took over last year. And I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about your history here in just a second. We're just pleased to have you here. We also have Dr. Lacy Epperson, who is a pharmacist at Mitchell's Drugstores, someplace in Southwest Missouri. I'm not sure exactly where that's at. But I hear she's very into community pharmacy, and was just recently a graduate of the NCPA Community Pharmacy Fellowship Program. And she's here to talk a little bit about that and what she does in her pharmacy position at Mitchell's. So welcome, guys. Drew, tell us a little bit about how you got started in pharmacy and what's going on here with your Community Pharmacy Fellowship. You might even talk a little bit about the core program you've got going on as well, just briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Tim and Daniel, for having me. Very excited to be on the podcast today and be chatting with you guys. My name is Drew Register, and I'm a 2016 graduate from the University of Louisiana Monroe School of Pharmacy, and was really involved in pharmacy association sort of all throughout pharmacy school, which is funny because when I went to school, I'd sort of been all involved in undergrad and had decided I wasn't going to do that. But a few years in, I actually realized, I started seeing pharmacists who worked for associations as their career. And I started realizing, this was actually a career opportunity. And what, really attracted me to the association world was having the opportunity to make an impact on the profession at a macro level. While I loved all of the patient interaction, I saw some of the changes that associations were making, and I really wanted to be a part of that. So a few years in, I decided that I was going to pursue an association residency program, and that's what I did. After I graduated, I completed the APHA Foundation Executive Residency in Association Management and Leadership, and love the experience so much that I've sort of stayed in the association world ever since. So for about the last 8 years now. I started at NCPA and have been the Director of Student Affairs and Professional Development since the beginning of the year. And so it's been a whirlwind of a year, but one of my favorite parts of my new role is managing and overseeing the fellowship program. And so we'll get into all those details later. One of the other programs that I do manage is our brand new Leadership and Business Development program, which is called CORE. And happy to talk to you guys about that another day, but excited to be on the podcast and be able to focus and hone in on the fellowship program today. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And NCPA and APHA are, of course, the leaders in the national pharmacy profession and doing all the innovative programs and, just advocating for the profession. I appreciate the fact that you're involved and appreciate all that NCPA does. So Lacy, tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you got started in pharmacy. I know a little bit of it. Let's just talk about those listeners and let them hear how you got started and kind of what led you up to the pharmacy fellowship and what you're doing today.
Yeah. So As a person who graduated in 2020, you would think that my story is not very long, but I actually have kind of a unique start to my career. And so, as I just mentioned, I'm a 2020 graduate of the University of Missouri, Kansas City campus, and I did graduate from the Springfield satellite campus specifically. So I was also very involved with different organizations in school, even though I told myself I was not going to be because I had from my past history in undergrad with that. But I think it's a great thing to be involved and to just continue to seek opportunities. So I graduated from pharmacy school. I went straight into the workforce. We all know what 2020 held. And so I had a virtual graduation. And during my virtual graduation, I'm pretty sure I went to work later that day. And so I actually started my first job in a long-term care setting. So I was in the closed door setting, but I had a lot of opportunity during COVID there. I have always had a heart for community pharmacy. That's actually where I figured I would end up. That's where my passions were. So for me, I was really proud of myself for trying to pursue other areas, because I always tell my students, just add to your toolbox. You never know what you're going to come across in your career in life where you may need to help someone. And so I did work at another community pharmacy job as the pharmacist in charge. I was there for a little while. I was prescribing and administering monoclonal antibodies to treat people with COVID. I was kind of living in a whirlwind then, shutting down my lobby, doing a lot of unique things as a pretty new pharmacist. And so again, I had lots of adding to my toolbox pretty early on. And then Tim very courageously kept pursuing me. And so I ended up, I'm very fortunate to work at Mitchell's Drugstores. I am a pharmacist here and currently serve as the director of clinical services. And I have been with Tim now for, I guess, about 3 years. And so in my current role, when I first started at Mitchell's, I literally had not even probably been here for 2 weeks. And Tim's like, hey, do you want to do the fellowship? And I was like, I honestly don't really know what that entails, but all I know is I was driving about 2 hours every day for work. And then literally shortly after that, I found out that I was pregnant, and I'm like, I don't think I can do a fellowship. I don't know. And so I wasn't entirely sure what all that entailed. And so fortunately, kind of long story, but we ended up, so I kind of took a year of seeing what it was. Tim's son Tanner comes on board. He completes the fellowship, and I'm like, okay, so this is what it's about. And so now that I understood kind of what that looked like, I was like 100%, like I want to do the fellowship. Tim completely supported me through that. Of course, I do get to work with Tim every day. I fortunately got to see Drew quite a bit over the last year. I get to see Daniel, but I do want to say, I know that I'm supposed to be formal, but I wore my podcast shirt. So for anyone that didn't get to go to NCPA Annual, you missed out, because I got my shirt at NCPA Annual. So I wore it for this special occasion, and I'm really excited to tell you guys about anything you want to know about the fellowship. And even after the podcast, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to do so.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And gosh, you did good representing the shirt there. And Drew, we'll get you one as soon as we can get some more made. We passed them all out at the NCPA convention. Anyhow, so Daniel, you want to go ahead and take on a few more questions for us?
So Lacy, how did you get into the program? Is there an application? Is it competitive? How did that work? For those new grads out there that might be interested, how's that work?
Yeah, so gosh, I have to rack my brain exactly what I did, but basically whenever, and Drew can always supplement anything I say in case I'm off here, but I did have to send in an application. It's basically like an interest in your commitment to continuing the fellowship program and why you think you would be a good fit. My impression was that it's more to make sure that it is a mutually good fit for you as well, because I think when we get out of school, there is so much flexibility in this current program on how people are using it across the country. So for me, as I described, I do have a full-time job already, whereas there were some people in the class that this is half of their job and represents half of their salary for the year, or they are to supplement it and find a new service through this fellowship that can then turn into a role, or maybe it's something they're doing on their own. So there's a lot of flexibility with the program itself. So the application process was more, I would almost call it kind of like a landscape assessment, in a way for you to kind of, I did have to to determine why I was interested and why I think I would be a good candidate. There is, and again, I can let Drew touch on this, but there also is a stipend, part of a refund for the first individuals that sign up. And so I was, of course, like one of the first ones. I was gonna get some of that money back. And so I signed up pretty early. And then I'm not sure as far as if they house a certain amount of seats or what that looks like. So if Drew wants to kind of help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's not a lot in terms of, specific requirements on the intake side of things. Like Lacy pointed out, we have an application process, and, we're essentially asking what your goals for the program are, where your pharmacy's at, sort of asking, we want to get to know you as the potential fellow, and then also get to know the practice side and sort of, where your pharmacy's at in terms of, what services you're already providing and things like that. And then we also do a pre-assessment form where we get a little bit deeper into the state of your pharmacy, I would say, but there's not a lot in terms of requirements. The pharmacy pays a $7,500 enrollment fee, but I do want to point out, to Lacy's point, the first 22 pharmacies that enroll each year do receive half of that tuition back in the form of a stipend refund. And so we still have some of those available for this upcoming fellowship cycle. So if anybody's interested, I can talk more.
You're enrolling fellows right now, right?
We are, yes. The next program actually kicks off in November.
Awesome.
And how long a period is that? Is that a 1-year commitment, Drew?
It is. It's essentially a 1-year program. This year is sped up just a tiny bit, but they will finish in August of 2025.
Very good. I didn't realize that there were some fellows that were outside of their employer. I just assumed that they had to have a employer sponsor like Mitchell Family Drug be a part of that. Is that right? There's both types of fellows?
So they as long as you are employed at a pharmacy and you have a license to practice, that's really the only requirement.
So can I ask a quick question, Daniel? Sorry, I'm going to jump in. So if someone works at a chain store or a store that's not necessarily a member of NCPA, they could still enroll. Do they have to be a member? How does that work?
They do. We do ask that the pharmacy become a member in order to complete the fellowship program. But yeah.
Very good. So Tim, how did you get into the being an employer sponsor for the fellowship program?
Well, this started back in those COVID years. I'm trying to think of whenever this program actually started. Was it 2021?
I think it was 2020.
2020. Okay, so it was the year of COVID. We heard that the program was rolling out. Carly Traylor was the person in charge of it then, before Drew, and talked with her a few times, and we had a pharmacist on staff, Paula Butler, who was interested. There was a lot going on in the pharmacy at that time, of course, with COVID, and she had expressed some interest, and so we inquired, decided this was going to be an investment that we decided we would go ahead and try. My original thought was, we'll just have some connections with some people throughout the nation. We'll learn a little bit about what everybody's doing, and then we'll try to bring something back to the pharmacy. We did get that, plus we got a lot more. And Paula actually kind of started implementing our community health workers in the workflow of the pharmacy. She started working on putting some creative things together. We put an adherence area in the back of our pharmacy and started kind of changing the way we thought about doing pharmacy and implementing medication synchronization. And that was the beginning of it when Lacy came on board. And what year was it? 22? You said 20? Can't remember when you came on.
21.
Well, 21. She was just finishing up her residency or her fellowship, and Paula was. And so then we started trying to figure out how are we going to take this and just run with it. And I will tell you, out of that spun, like Lacy said, Tanner, my son, decided he would like to go through the fellowship, and he helped us implement long-term care at home services, which was huge. When I look at the dollars saved, Paula's project was mainly focused on the community health workers and in the MedSync progress program that we have to be able to help us reduce our inventory, be proactive in the filling versus reactive in the filling of the medications. Tanner's implemented the long-term care part of it. And then, of course, Lacy can talk a little bit about what her project was. But I can tell you, every time we have a fellow go through those programs, it comes back to us, at least 5-10-fold. And I'm talking, job satisfaction. I'm talking financial, a lot of different things, patient satisfaction, a lot of those things. So I can tell you, I guess I kind of became the preceptor by default, because I'm the one that said, let's do it, and wrote the check and move forward from there. But I can tell you, I haven't regretted any of it. There are some days it's challenging. I mean, I remember during COVID, we had many people sick, or trying to take care of, people that were sick coming into the pharmacy, very lightly staffed. We try to do creative things with our staffing during that time to try to help protect each other. And I will tell you that, there were some days that we're like, we're not sure how we're going to do it. We're just going to buckle down and make sure she's on that call. And I would listen in with my earbuds and continue to do all the things that I do to take care of people during the day. So that's pretty much how it is. And I tell you, NCPA has been very supportive. And the program continues to get more and more informative with great people. We have people like Trip Logan and Travis Wolf, Joe Moose. You can name more people, Drew, but I mean, these people are national leaders in the pharmacy profession that we have access to on a regular basis. But not only that, is I had access to other owners that were doing very innovative things, Bob Lominack, and some of these other guys that do some really, really good things in their pharmacies, and giving me encouragement, say, okay, yeah, we're doing some of the right things, or we need to be looking at this, so that's kind of how I got it. I guess it was by default.
So Drew, what are some of the goals of the fellowship program? What kind of things are those fellows learning they're not going to pick up when they just are working with Tim or any other independent owner on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I love this question because it's sort of multifaceted and it really depends on the angle you're looking at. But, if you're asking why we started the fellowship program, I would say, when we really looked out there at existing training opportunities for, community pharmacists, your brain goes toward the traditional community pharmacy residency programs. And while those are really great programs, oftentimes I think there's about 130 of those, maybe a little bit more in the country now, and they're geographically limited. So if you're interested in doing something like that, you may be limited to a certain area. And there's often there can be cumbersome requirements in terms of, it can be a little bit more stringent. It's a little bit more prescriptive, and community pharmacies really have to make sure that they're meeting certain expectations and requirements of those programs. And for pharmacies that are, set up and they have the infrastructure to do so, that's great. But, you guys, I don't have to tell you, a lot of times we're hearing from our community pharmacies that, they're strapped for time, resources, and manpower. And so we really wanted to be able to offer something that would sort of meet fellows and pharmacies where they are now. The program is modeled after CPSN's Flip the Pharmacy initiative, which, if you're not familiar, is a practice transformation initiative. And, it essentially aims to flip the pharmacy away from more traditional dispensing models to more longitudinal, patient level, enhanced care services and those sorts of business models. And so part of that is identifying best practices from workflows and how to provide these services. And that's essentially the point of this program, is to bring all of these amazing community pharmacies together and help us learn from one another. I won't harp on it too much because Tim just kind of got into it, but there's, depending on where you are in the country, the pharmacist scope of practice may be entirely different. And so there's some pharmacies that are out there, who may have test to treat authority and they're doing amazing things, and maybe some states who are a little bit more behind. And so when they do get that authority and we kind of push them across the finish line, we're providing them with, access to resources and other fellows who are saying, oh, we've been doing this for a couple of years. Here's how we've already gotten started. And it's almost like a roadmap. So I think the learnings that fellows can take away from one another and what different pharmacies are already doing, we're all better together when we're learning from one another. And then our main goal, I would say, for the fellows themselves is we want them to be able to emerge from this program and be clinical services directors for their pharmacies. And that role in itself may vary depending on the store or the site, but that would be our hope. Would be that the pharmacists who complete this program are in a position to really be thought leaders and the leaders of those clinical services within their pharmacies.
That is fantastic. Lacy, tell us about your fellowship project.
Ooh, so I threw a big curveball right before I was supposed to submit my capstone. So,
You kept us on our toes.
So I guess I should go back to a little bit of what I do. I also, for those of you that may not know, I serve as a regional facilitator for CPSN for the Southwest Missouri region. So I'm very involved with CPSN as well, kind of as Drew alluded to that model. So I am familiar with that model of Flip the Pharmacy. And so through some of my involvement with that, through a lot of my involvement with that, I also teach I'm adjunct faculty for the CE Impact Community Health Worker course. And so I'm very passionate about utilizing community health workers in our current operations and from an outreach standpoint. There are some logistics to making that happen. And to be really blunt about it, it's the dollars. People are like, well, how do I turn it into a service line? And so one thing I'm passionate about is turning it into a service line and turning it into fulfilling both of these things that meet patient care and business objectives as well. And so, long story, but if you know me, I am a planner to a T, and I had my fellowship planned from before I even stepped foot into the fellowship, and it was going to be how to open a DPC practice because we have a recent clinic that just opened. And so I stuck with it, and I stuck with it, and I stuck with it. There were a couple of curveballs, and I had a couple of sessions through the fellowship program that really triggered me at the end whenever I went to develop my capstone project. That was more of a stepwise process. And it caused me to reflect and think, where have I actually spent a lot of my energy and my efforts and my passions over the course of the last year? And that actually happened to be in a huge program going on in Missouri right now, led by Missouri, in the vaccine gap closure program through CPSN Missouri. And I was very fortunate to be involved kind of on the development side of the clinical tool skill set as well. And so through my involvement in this, it really checked off a lot of boxes for me that said, this is actually where I feel like my project, my capstone project would make more sense. And I can develop some kind of roadmap that is still unique, still something that can be taken through different gap closure programs, not just vaccinations even, but different gap closure programs. Because right now, everyone's asking, well, what can we do with our community health workers? How is it different? And so I really wanted to just kind of lay out this project that said, here's what we've currently done. Here's some data that I can actually share with you. Here's some dollars that I can put to it as well, because I do care about the dollars. And so long story short, all this to say, my project ended up last minute. Whenever I ended up needing to do it, I realized I have all of this information at my fingertips because I've been so involved with it and in tune with it. I'm very involved with the CPSN Health Equity team as well. And so through that involvement, Jake Galdo and actually Ben Jolly was on with him during our session that we had. They talked about quality measures. They talked about health equity. I realized where Trip Logan came on and talked about community health workers, as Trip mentioned. And I realized this is where we're spending a lot of our energy and efforts right now as well. Especially myself. And so my project ended up being a type of gap closure model utilizing community health workers in our pharmacies.
Very impressive. Very good. And both you and Drew mentioned the Flip the Pharmacy initiative. Tim, this might be a future podcast for us. That future pharmacy, that Flip the Pharmacy program has been very successful. We may want to take advantage of that at a later podcast. Lacy, has there been any other light bulb moments that you've experienced this past year that really solidified for you the value of this fellowship program? Is there anything you can share with us?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I love precepting students as well. And so whenever I have students, I always try to instill in them. So as a person who did not pursue any type of residency program or post-grad training per se, this was my post-grad training. And it may not have been my first year right out of school, but I think it's important to be a lifelong learner and just be open to how everyone else practices. Like, we are not in a box. And I think it's important to change as the profession changes, change as our patients' needs change as our community changes. And so like that's where a lot of my implementations at our store level have come from, is what does my community need? And so for me, being able to hear, there were a couple of just like lectures that stick out to me that I'm like, that was an interesting call out that I just hadn't thought about doing it that way, and so I think it's so important to just be a learner. Listen, even if you do know what's going on in there, which I mean, to be honest with you, I also do consulting with people and I teach them on some of these things like adherence programs and like point of care testing. And so, and like community health workers, but I can honestly say I left every single session learning something, whether it was from one of my classmates, whether it was from the speaker themselves. There are also clinical sessions in there, so kind of reviews on some topics. And for me, that was awesome as a person who didn't have the traditional post-grad training. And so I think that's really important too. I'm so caught up a lot of times in the business side, the service side. And so to have that clinical revamp was really awesome for me. And the two that I just keep thinking about and like still almost haunt me to this day, because they were light bulb moments. The two that really just stick out to me were honestly, one, I think it was one of our very first sessions. We do this, it's called a spaghetti diagram, and you have to track people in your pharmacy and just watch them. How many times do they go where? And like track them. And to me, I thought like, I care about efficiency. And so whenever I'm watching that, I'm like, oh my goodness, like that like made me cringe watching, why are we running over to that same place this many times? Or how can I fix that? And so it's really caused me in a good way to kind of reflect and think about how we can change things internally. And then another one, as I mentioned previously, that stuck out to me, this is more of the haunting one, I'll say, is the quality measures. I know as a store who has a really robust adherence program, it absolutely pains me the more I learn about some of the intricacies that go on in the background. And so unfortunately, however you want to look at it, we do have to kind of be able to put out the fires on the back end too, from the financial side, and be able to have those prevention and fee mitigations and things like that. And so I took those two to heart, and I've tried to make some changes personally for the team at our stores. And I think I'll continue to do so because they really stuck out in my brain.
I will say, Daniel, that whenever she did the spaghetti diagram, she said that I was all over the place in the spaghetti diagram, watching the recording or whatever.
No surprises there. No surprises.
I regret following Tim as the pharmacist. I should have followed like a regular step pharmacist, but yeah.
I kept her pen busy.
Well, as a hospital pharmacist that did a 2-year residency, my daughter's in a residency down at Baylor. I've precepted hundreds of hospital residents. I love this NCPA program for 3 reasons. One, it's very accessible. It's something you can do while you work, while you have a family. Excuse me. It is something that is exposure to, to national leaders in pharmacy. So it's not just the preceptors within your store. It's the entire country brings in preceptors, and it's so practical. The application, the learning there is so real life. I just love those 3 tenets of that. I think it's wonderful. Drew, how many residents are there? How many fellows are there across the country right now? And is there opportunity to have more?
Yeah, great question, Daniel. We've taken our class sizes the last few years have ranged from about 20 to 25 or so. And this year we're going in, we have about 15 enrolled right now. And so we don't have a limited number of seats, but to Lacy's earlier point, we always encourage you to get in there and make sure that, you're one of our first to get in and receive one of the scholarships. So there's 22 of those available, and we want to make sure that stores sign up and get those.
Excellent. Well, Tim, let me give you the last word here, then I'll do a final wrap up. Will that work?
Sounds great. So, Drew, what, as far as like, if somebody wants to enroll in the program, what do they need to do? Student, fellow wise and pharmacy wise, just give us a brief, this is where we need to go.
Yeah, very simple. So our website landing page is ncpa.org/fellowship. That's a great place to get started, learn more about the program, see what it's about. And then if you are a prospective fellow or you're a prospective pharmacy and maybe you don't have a potential fellow identified, we have a interest form, and all you do is submit your contact information. And then we can hop on the phone and I can talk to you about, tell you more about the program. We can talk more about, who in your pharmacy might be a right fit for the program. Or if you're a prospective fellow, I can talk to you about how to get your pharmacy on board and make sure that, it's a good fit for the program. So that's a very simple interest form on that fellowship page. They'll see a little dialogue box pop up on the right. All they have to do is submit their contact information. If somebody goes to the site and they know that they're ready to sign up, there's a link. You can't miss it at the top of the page if you're ready to enroll in the program. And that was the form that Lacy talked about earlier, where you actually go in and sort of fill out your goals for the program and tell us more about your pharmacy, and we'll get you signed up.
And just as a pharmacy owner, if anybody's an owner and wants more information from an owner standpoint, feel free to contact me. There are some owner, testimonials on the NCPA side as well. I think I'm actually one of them. But feel free to contact me as well. So Daniel, you want to close us out? Thank you guys. It's nice having you on the podcast today.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lacy. Thank you, Drew. It's been great having you join us today. And we wish we could talk all day on this very topic. It would keep us interested. But we'll end our podcast here, and we'll encourage all of our listeners to share this podcast with their friends and to check out all of our Pharmacy Frontiers podcasts on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, it's Tim and Dan.